Imagine a civilization so vast it stretched across continents, a grand empire that ruled from China to Europe, an advanced society with architectural wonders that defied the technology of its time. And then imagine that empire being systematically erased from our history books. This is the story of Tartaria, or rather the story of what might have been Tartaria, an empire so powerful that its very existence threatens to unravel the accepted timeline of human civilization, a forgotten kingdom that challenges everything we've been taught about our past. Tonight we embark on a journey through forbidden history, through architectural anomalies and cartographic mysteries, through the shadows of our collective memory where truth and myth intertwine, where questions outnumber answers. Curiosity leads us down unexpected paths. The name Tartaria appears on maps dating back centuries, spanning territories from Eastern Europe through Central Asia and into the far reaches of Siberia. Yet modern history books barely mention this once mighty realm. It's as if an entire civilization has been deliberately removed from our consciousness. Why would such a vast empire be erased? What secrets did it hold? What technologies did it possess? And most importantly, who benefits from its absence in our historical narrative? These are the questions that have fueled researchers, historians, and curious minds for decades. Some claim Tartaria was an advanced civilization with free energy technology. Others suggest it was simply a geographical region misinterpreted by modern researchers. The truth, as always, likely lies somewhere in between these extremes. But the evidence, once you begin to see it, is difficult to ignore. Old maps show Tartaria as a unified empire, spanning millions of square miles, with cities whose architecture shares striking similarities across continents, buildings that showcase a unified aesthetic from Moscow to San Francisco, structures that seem impossibly advanced for their supposed time of construction. Throughout this documentary, we'll examine buildings across the world that share distinctive features, star forts with identical geometric patterns scattered across continents, massive stone structures built with such precision they've withstood centuries, and technology that seems anachronistic to the historical period in which it was supposedly created. We'll also explore the sudden and mysterious mud floods that allegedly buried the first floors of buildings worldwide, the strange phenomenon of orphan trains in America, the global architectural reset that occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the curious absence of construction photographs for many of the world's most impressive buildings. But before we dive deeper, a word of caution. This documentary doesn't claim to present absolute truth. Rather, it offers an alternative perspective on history, a lens through which we might view the inconsistencies and gaps in our accepted historical narrative, a framework for questioning what we've been taught. Tonight, I invite you to suspend disbelief, to set aside conventional wisdom, to open your mind to possibilities that may seem fantastical at first glance, but which, upon closer inspection, begin to form patterns that cannot be easily dismissed. Patterns that suggest our history may not be as we've been told. As you drift towards sleep, allow these ideas to percolate in your subconscious. Let the questions linger in your mind. Consider the possibility that human civilization is far older, far more advanced, and far more mysterious than conventional history suggests. Consider that perhaps, just perhaps, we are not the first advanced civilization to walk this earth. The story of Tartaria is one of mystery and intrigue, of hidden knowledge and forgotten wisdom, of architectural marvels and technological wonders. It's a story that challenges our understanding of human progress and the linear nature of technological advancement, a story that asks us to reconsider everything we thought we knew. In the coming hours, we'll explore evidence both compelling and controversial. We'll examine maps, buildings, and historical documents. We'll consider the testimony of researchers who have dedicated their lives to uncovering this lost history, and we'll contemplate the implications of their findings for our understanding of human civilization. Some of what you'll hear will seem implausible. Some will challenge deeply held beliefs about our past. Some may even strike you as conspiracy theory. But I ask only that you listen with an open mind, that you consider the evidence presented, and that you draw your own conclusions about the lost empire of Tartaria. For if even a fraction of this theory proves true, if Tartaria was indeed a vast and advanced civilization that has been systematically erased from our history books, Then we must ask ourselves, what other aspects of our past have been hidden from us? What other truths lie buried beneath layers of historical revision? What else don't we know about our own story? Tonight we begin to peel back those layers, to examine the evidence with fresh eyes, to consider alternative narratives that might better explain the anomalies in our historical record, to question not just what we know, but how we know it, and to explore the possibility that the truth about our past is stranger than any fiction. Welcome to the lost world of Tartaria, a world of mystery and wonder, a world that may have been deliberately hidden from us, a world we're about to rediscover together, as we journey through the shadows of forgotten history in search of truth. Let us begin. Chapter 2, Premise and Stakes. What if I told you that much of what you know about world history is incomplete? That a massive, technologically advanced civilization has been systematically removed from our textbooks? That evidence of this civilization exists in plain sight, in the very architecture of our oldest and most iconic buildings. This is the central premise of the Tartarian theory. The idea that a vast empire once spanned continents, possessed advanced technology, and was deliberately erased from history during a worldwide reset sometime in the 18th or 19th century. A theory that, if true, would fundamentally alter our understanding of human civilization. The stakes of this inquiry couldn't be higher. We're not simply discussing an obscure historical footnote. We're questioning the very foundation of our historical narrative. We're challenging the linear progression of technological development that forms the backbone of our understanding of human advancement. If Tartaria existed as theorists suggest, we must reconsider everything. The timeline of architectural development, the history of technological innovation, the nature of human society and governance, even our understanding of natural disasters and their impact on human civilization would require radical revision. Consider the implications for a moment. If a global advanced civilization existed just a few hundred years ago and was subsequently erased from history, what does that tell us about the institutions we trust to preserve and communicate our collective past? What does it suggest about the control of information throughout history? The Tartarian theory proposes that we are not at the pinnacle of human achievement, but rather recovering from a catastrophic reset that erased much of our advanced knowledge. It suggests that technologies we consider modern innovations may actually be rediscoveries of lost Tartarian science. A humbling proposition indeed. Some researchers suggest that free energy systems were once commonplace, that massive atmospheric energy collectors, disguised as cultural buildings, provided wireless electricity throughout Tartarian territories. That ornate domes, spires, and starforts weren't merely decorative but served specific technological functions now forgotten. If true, this would explain the peculiar abundance of grand, elaborate architecture that appeared seemingly overnight across the world in the 1800s. Buildings constructed with such precision and scale that they would challenge even modern engineering capabilities, structures so similar in design despite being separated by oceans. The implications extend beyond architecture and technology. They touch on fundamental questions about human potential and the cyclical nature of civilization. If we've risen and fallen before, might we do so again? Are we doomed to repeat a cycle of advancement and collapse? Or can understanding our true history help us break this pattern? These questions aren't merely academic. They affect how we view our present and how we plan for our future. They challenge us to reconsider our relationship with technology, with power structures, with the very notion of progress. They ask us to contemplate what might have been lost and what might still be recovered. The stakes extend to our very identity as a species. Our understanding of who we are is intimately tied to our understanding of where we came from. If our historical narrative has been manipulated, so too has our collective self-image. We may be heirs to a legacy far grander and more complex than we've been led to believe. Some will dismiss these ideas as fantasy or conspiracy theory. They'll point to the lack of definitive proof, to the speculative nature of the evidence. They'll cite the consensus of mainstream historians who reject the Tartarian narrative. They'll question the motives of those who promote alternative historical theories. And these are valid concerns. Extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. But what if that evidence exists all around us, hidden in plain sight? What if our inability to see it stems not from its absence, but from our conditioning to overlook it? What if we've been taught to dismiss anomalies rather than investigate them? The Tartarian theory asks us to reconsider buildings we pass every day, to look with fresh eyes at the ornate old-world architecture of our cities, to question how such massive, intricate structures were built in eras supposedly lacking modern construction technology, to wonder why so many share identical features across continents. It asks us to examine old maps showing vast territories labeled Tartaria or Grand Tartary, to question why this enormous empire receives scant mention in our history books, to consider why its very existence seems to have been systematically downplayed or erased, to wonder who benefits from this historical revision. The theory challenges us to explain architectural anomalies like sunken first floors, buildings where windows are half buried in soil, streets that had to be raised by entire stories, the curious phenomenon of mud floods that supposedly buried cities worldwide within the same historical period. Coincidence or evidence of catastrophe? It invites us to question the sudden appearance of orphan trains in America, the mysterious arrival of thousands of children with no clear origin, the repopulation efforts that followed the alleged reset, the curious absence of construction photographs for many of our most impressive historical buildings. Most importantly, the Tartarian theory asks us to consider the nature of historical truth itself, to recognize that history is written by the victors, that narratives serve those in power. That information can be controlled, manipulated, and even erased when it threatens established structures of authority and belief. If even parts of this theory prove correct, we face a profound responsibility to recover what was lost, to learn from past cycles of advancement and collapse, to question the institutions that shape our understanding of reality, to seek truth even when it contradicts our most fundamental assumptions. The stakes, in short, are nothing less than our understanding of ourselves, our past, our potential, our future. The Tartarian theory offers a mirror in which we might see ourselves not as the most advanced civilization to exist, but as the inheritors of a legacy we've forgotten. A humbling but potentially enlightening perspective. So as we proceed through this documentary, I ask you to maintain that balance of open-minded curiosity and healthy skepticism, to consider the evidence presented without rushing to judgment, to hold space for possibilities that challenge conventional wisdom, to engage with ideas that might seem fantastical at first glance. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and sometimes the most important discoveries lie not in finding new information, but in seeing existing information through new eyes, in recognizing patterns that have always been there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to notice them. Let's continue our journey into the lost empire of Tartaria and see where the evidence leads us. Chapter 3. Historical Context. To understand the Tartarian mystery, we must first establish what mainstream history tells us. According to conventional historical accounts, Tartary or Tartaria was simply a geographical region, a vast territory in northern and central Asia inhabited by various nomadic peoples collectively known as Tartars. This explanation seems straightforward enough, but it fails to account for the prominence Tartaria received on historical maps. It doesn't explain why cartographers for centuries depicted Tartaria not merely as a region, but as a unified empire, complete with its own flag, coat of arms, and clearly defined territories. Early maps from the 16th to 19th centuries show Tartaria as one of the largest empires in the world, spanning from Eastern Europe and the Black Sea across all of Central Asia, reaching into Siberia and bordering China. Some maps even show its influence extending into North America through Alaska. The name itself has an uncertain etymology. Some link it to the Greek Tartarus or the underworld, others to the Tatar people who inhabited parts of the region, while still others suggest connections to earlier civilizations like the Turks, Mongols, or even more ancient peoples. European accounts from the Middle Ages describe Tartars as fierce warriors, descendants of Genghis Khan who threatened European civilization. Yet by the 18th century, references to this once mighty empire begin to fade from historical records. By the 19th century, Tartaria had been largely forgotten. Mainstream historians explain this disappearance through the rise of the Russian Empire, arguing that Tartary was gradually absorbed by expanding Russian territories, that what was once called Tartaria was simply renamed as Russia expanded eastward, a neat explanation that ties up loose ends. But this account leaves numerous questions unanswered. Why would cartographers depict Tartaria as a unified empire with consistent boundaries if it was merely a geographical region? Why would they assign it symbols of sovereignty? Why would they distinguish it so clearly from surrounding territories? And perhaps most puzzlingly, why would an empire so vast, larger than any in recorded history, receive so little attention in our historical narrative? Why do our history books dedicate countless pages to smaller, less significant kingdoms, while barely mentioning this colossus that dominated Asia? The historical record becomes even more curious when we examine 18th and 19th century accounts. Travelers to the region describe encountering an advanced civilization, cities with sophisticated architecture, technologies that seemed ahead of their time, cultural practices distinct from those of neighboring peoples. These accounts describe Tartarian architecture as particularly distinctive, featuring ornate domes, elaborate spires, and intricate decorative elements. Massive structures built with incredible precision. Buildings that share striking similarities with what we now call Old World architecture, found across Europe and America. Contemporaneous descriptions of Tartarian society suggest a level of advancement that contradicts our understanding of the region. References to sophisticated systems of governance, to scientific knowledge that exceeded that of European powers, to technologies that seem anachronistic for the era. By the early 19th century, however, these accounts begin to disappear. References to Tartaria in official documents become scarce. Maps are redrawn with Russian territories expanding to cover what was once labeled as Tartaria. It's as if an entire civilization was being systematically erased from the record. This period coincides with what Tartarian researchers call the Reset, a time when, according to alternative historians, a catastrophic event, possibly natural, possibly manufactured, devastated Tartarian civilization. An event followed by a coordinated effort to eliminate evidence of Tartaria's existence. The 19th century also saw massive architectural projects undertaken worldwide. Incredible buildings appeared across Europe and America, structures so grand and complex that they would challenge modern engineering capabilities. Yet we're told they were built with relatively primitive 19th century technology. Chicago's White City appeared for the 1893 World's Fair. Dozens of massive neoclassical buildings constructed in just a few years, only to be mysteriously destroyed by fire shortly after. Similar patterns of construction and destruction can be observed at other World's Fairs of the era. In San Francisco, elaborate buildings supposedly constructed in the late 1800s were devastated by the 1906 earthquake and subsequent fires. In Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other cities, similar architecture appeared during the same period, all sharing distinctive features regardless of their geographic location. This architectural consistency across continents raises important questions. How did builders separated by oceans, with no instant communication, create such similar designs? How were such massive structures completed so quickly without modern construction equipment? And why do so few construction photographs exist? These buildings share distinctive elements that Tartarian researchers find significant. Ornate domes topped with spires or cupolas, elaborate star forts with identical geometric patterns, intricate carvings and statuary that would require master craftsmanship, features found consistently across supposedly unconnected cultures. Many of these structures contain technological elements that seem out of place for their era. Complex ventilation systems, sophisticated acoustics, curious metal components embedded in stone, features that some researchers suggest were part of atmospheric energy collection systems. This theory proposes that Tartarian buildings weren't merely architectural marvels, but functional technology disguised as cultural structures, that ornate domes served as wireless energy collectors, that spires acted as transmitters, that the entire system provided free energy throughout Tartarian territories. If true, this would represent a level of technological advancement that contradicts our understanding of historical progress. It would suggest that technologies we consider modern innovations were actually known and implemented centuries ago, only to be lost or suppressed following the Tartarian collapse. The historical anomalies extend beyond architecture. Old photographs from the 19th century show cities with few people but elaborate buildings. Images of muddy streets with first floors of buildings partially buried. Pictures of construction sites without construction equipment. Visual evidence that challenges conventional explanations. Researchers point to the curious phenomenon of mud floods reported across the world in the 18th and 19th centuries. Events that buried the first floors of buildings in cities from San Francisco to Moscow, leading to the raising of street levels and the creation of what we now call basement levels. These events coincide with the period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps, when its territories were being absorbed by expanding empires, when its very existence was being erased from the historical record. A convergence of circumstances that alternative historians find highly suspicious. The historical context of Tartaria is thus a tapestry of documented facts and suspicious absences, of maps that clearly show its existence and textbooks that barely mention it, of physical evidence in the form of architecture and curious gaps in the historical record, of a narrative that doesn't quite add up. As we proceed, we'll examine this evidence more closely. We'll look at specific buildings, maps, and historical documents. We'll consider both conventional explanations and alternative theories. We'll weigh the evidence and explore the implications of this forgotten chapter in human history. For if Tartaria was indeed a vast, advanced civilization that has been systematically erased from our collective memory, then our understanding of human history requires fundamental revision, and our conception of human potential and technological development must be dramatically expanded. Chapter 4. First Evidence. Our examination of the Tartarian mystery begins with maps, not speculative reconstructions or modern interpretations, but actual historical maps drawn by cartographers between the 16th and 19th centuries. Documents that clearly depict a vast empire called Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. A French map from 1721 by Guillaume de Lille shows Grande Tartary, spanning from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, stretching from Persia and India in the south to the Arctic Ocean in the north. An empire dwarfing its neighbors in size and clearly marked as a unified political entity. A British map from 1806 similarly depicts independent Tartary as a distinct political region, complete with internal boundaries marking different Tartarian territories. Neighboring Chinese Tartary and Russian Tartary suggest areas once part of a larger Tartarian domain, later conquered by expanding powers. These maps aren't obscure or contested documents. They were the standard geographical references of their day, created by the most respected cartographers in Europe, used by governments, militaries, and explorers. Considered authoritative representations of the known world. Yet modern history textbooks barely mention Tartaria. World history courses skip from the Mongol Empire to the Russian Empire with little acknowledgement of what came between. It's as if an entire civilization has been reduced to a footnote, a curious omission that demands explanation. Even more telling are the symbols associated with Tartaria on these maps. Many show the empire with its own coat of arms, its own flag, symbols of sovereignty not typically assigned to mere geographical regions, indications that contemporary Europeans viewed Tartaria as a unified political entity. The Tartarian flag often featured a griffin or double-headed eagle, symbols associated with royalty and imperial power, emblems that later appeared in the coats of arms of European powers, perhaps appropriated from the empire they helped dismantle. A final conquest through symbolic assimilation. Beyond maps, we find references to Tartaria in historical documents from multiple sources: European diplomatic correspondence, travel accounts, scientific expeditions, military reports. These primary sources describe encounters with Tartarian officials, cities, and customs, further evidence of its reality. The Encyclopaedia Britannica's 1771 edition contains extensive entries on Tartary, describing it as a vast country in northern Asia, divided into several territories with distinct governance. This authoritative source clearly considered Tartaria significant enough to document in detail. Yet modern editions contain drastically reduced references. Russian archives hold particular significance in the Tartarian mystery. Many documents from before the 19th century reference Tartarian territories and peoples, while later Russian historical accounts minimize these references, a pattern consistent with the theory of deliberate historical revision. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes not from documents but from physical buildings that still stand in cities across the world, architectural marvels that share distinctive features regardless of their supposed origin, structures that raise troubling questions about their true history. Consider the curious case of the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. Elaborate temporary structures built for a 6-month exhibition, buildings of such grandeur and complexity that they would challenge modern construction methods, yet supposedly erected and then dismantled in less than a year. Or examine San Francisco before the 1906 earthquake, a city full of ornate, massive buildings, supposedly built by a small frontier population, structures that would require enormous resources, skilled labor, and advanced engineering. In a newly established city with limited infrastructure, similar patterns appear in Chicago, St. Louis, and other American cities. Elaborate architecture that seem to appear almost overnight, buildings with consistent stylistic elements matching those found across Europe and Asia. A global architectural language that defies conventional historical explanation. These buildings feature distinctive elements that Tartarian researchers find significant: ornate domes with particular proportions, star forts with identical geometric patterns, columns, arches, and facades with specific decorative motifs, architectural fingerprints of a unified civilization. Many show signs of what researchers call cultural layering, evidence that original Tartarian structures were repurposed by later civilizations, modifications that often obscure their original functions, adaptations that transformed technological buildings into purely cultural or governmental structures. The architectural evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine construction methods. Many of these buildings feature massive stone blocks fitted with incredible precision, no mortar between perfectly cut stones, construction techniques that would challenge modern equipment, methods inconsistent with 19th century technology. Historical photographs add another layer to the mystery. Images of cities under construction show curious absences: no cranes or heavy equipment, few scaffoldings, limited evidence of the construction process itself, as if these massive structures appeared rather than being built. Other photographs show cities partially buried in mud, first floors submerged below street level, windows half covered by raised ground, evidence of the mysterious mud floods that researchers believe may have been part of the cataclysm that ended Tartarian civilization. These floods coincide with the period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps, when its territories were being absorbed by expanding empires, when its very existence was being written out of history. A convergence that alternative historians find too consistent to be coincidental. The evidence extends to technological anomalies embedded in these structures, complex ventilation systems in buildings supposedly designed before modern HVAC, sophisticated acoustic properties in domes and halls, copper or iron components embedded in stone structures in curious configurations. Some researchers propose these were elements of atmospheric energy systems, that Tartarian buildings weren't merely cultural or governmental structures, but functional technology disguised as architecture, a worldwide wireless energy network predating Tesla by centuries. They point to the curious abundance of copper domes and spires, to the consistent use of quartz and specific metals in key structural elements, to the geometric precision of star forts and building layouts, evidence, they suggest, of technological rather than merely aesthetic design principles. This theory is bolstered by curious references in 18th and 19th century documents, accounts of strange atmospheric phenomena around certain buildings, reports of unusual properties exhibited by Tartarian structures, descriptions that suggest functionality beyond mere shelter or symbolism. The orphan train phenomenon adds another disturbing dimension. Between 1854 and 1929, thousands of children were transported on trains across America, officially described as a welfare program relocating orphans from eastern cities to western territories. But with troubling gaps in documentation, researchers question where so many orphans suddenly came from, why their origins are poorly documented, whether they were truly orphans or survivors of the cataclysm that ended Tartarian civilization in North America, children whose heritage and history needed to be erased and rewritten. This pattern of population displacement appears in multiple locations associated with Tartarian territories: mass relocations following unexplained disasters, repopulation efforts with curious demographic patterns, movements of people that coincide with the architectural and cultural transformations of former Tartarian cities. As we examine these converging lines of evidence, a troubling question emerges. How could such a vast empire, clearly documented on historical maps, physically evidenced in architecture across continents, referenced in primary historical sources, simply disappear from our collective memory? The conventional explanation, that Tartaria was merely a geographical term for a region gradually absorbed by expanding powers, fails to account for the evidence. It doesn't explain the consistent architectural patterns across continents, the technological anomalies in surviving structures, the curious gaps in the historical record. A more troubling possibility suggests itself: that Tartaria was indeed a vast advanced civilization, that it possessed technologies we are only now rediscovering, that it represented a system of knowledge and power that threatened emerging imperial interests, and that it was deliberately erased from history. If true, this would represent one of the greatest historical cover-ups ever perpetrated, the systematic elimination of an entire civilization from our collective memory. A rewriting of history so complete that even the existence of the cover-up itself has been largely forgotten. But as we'll see in the next section, the evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine specific Tartarian structures in detail, when we analyze the technological components hidden in plain sight, when we consider the true purpose of buildings we've been taught to view as merely cultural or governmental. Chapter 5. Act 2. Contradictions and Anomalies. As we deepen our investigation into Tartaria, we must confront the contradictions in our accepted historical narrative. Inconsistencies that, once noticed, become impossible to ignore. Anomalies that challenge the very foundation of our understanding of recent human history. Questions that demand answers. Consider the curious case of architecture in the 19th century. We're told that neoclassical buildings across America were constructed by a young nation still developing its infrastructure. Yet these structures rival or surpass anything being built with modern technology today. A puzzling mismatch of capability and result. The official history tells us that Washington, D.C. was built from scratch in a swamp, that the White House, Capitol, and other magnificent buildings were constructed by a fledgling nation with limited resources. Yet these structures display a level of craftsmanship and engineering that would challenge modern capabilities. Similar contradictions appear when examining the great rebuilding of cities like Chicago, Baltimore, and San Francisco. After fires or earthquakes supposedly destroyed these cities, they were rebuilt with astounding speed. Massive stone structures rising in months rather than years, an inexplicable feat of construction. The conventional timeline suggests these cities were rebuilt using 19th century technology, horse-drawn carts, manual labor, and basic pulley systems. Yet photographs from these reconstruction periods show curiously empty construction sites. Few workers, minimal equipment, and little evidence of the building process itself. Perhaps most telling are the buildings themselves. Many show technological features inconsistent with their supposed construction date. Complex ventilation systems in structures built before modern HVAC. Sophisticated acoustic properties in domes and halls, features that suggest advanced design knowledge. The official narrative cannot explain why buildings across continents share identical architectural features, why structures in Moscow match those in San Francisco, why buildings in Paris mirror those in Shanghai. A global architectural language that existed before global communication, before standardized building plans. We are told these similarities result from architectural fashion and mutual influence. Yet the precision of the matching elements suggests something more systematic, as if these buildings were created according to a unified design language, a global template rather than mere stylistic imitation. Contradictions extend to the curious phenomenon of sunken buildings, structures across the world with first floors now serving as basements, windows half buried in raised streets, elaborate entryways now sitting below ground level. A global pattern that defies conventional explanation. The official history attributes these sunken floors to intentional street raising for sewage systems, yet this occurred simultaneously across continents, without modern communication or coordination. Another global phenomenon that somehow manifested identically in supposedly unconnected locations. Then there's the puzzling issue of the world's fairs. Massive, elaborate, temporary structures built for exhibitions lasting only months. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair reportedly constructed over 200 magnificent buildings in just a few years, only to destroy most of them immediately afterward. These weren't simple pavilions. They were architectural marvels with massive domes, intricate detailing, and advanced features, supposedly built using 19th century methods, then deliberately demolished despite their beauty and function, a wasteful practice that contradicts both economics and logic. Similar patterns appear at World's Fairs in Paris, St. Louis, and San Francisco. Incredible structures appearing almost overnight, showcased briefly, then mysteriously destroyed by fire or deliberate demolition, as if their purpose was not exhibition, but something else entirely, something requiring their removal. The contradictions in our historical narrative extend to population questions. Cities like San Francisco supposedly grew from nothing to magnificent urban centers in decades. Yet historical photographs show elaborate buildings with strangely empty streets, infrastructure preceding the population it was meant to serve. Official history tells us America was expanding westward in the 19th century, pioneers settling new territories. Yet many Western cities show signs of previous development, elaborate architecture appearing before sufficient population to justify it, buildings that preceded their supposed builders. The orphan train phenomenon presents another historical anomaly. Between 1854 and 1929, somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 orphaned children were transported across America. The official narrative describes this as a welfare program. Yet the numbers and timing raise troubling questions. Where did so many orphans suddenly come from? Why were they relocated in such large numbers? Why are their origins so poorly documented? And why does this mass relocation coincide with the period when Tartarian territories in North America were being absorbed by the expanding United States? Perhaps the most glaring contradiction lies in our maps themselves. Historical maps clearly show Tartaria as one of the world's largest empires. Yet modern history textbooks barely mention it. A vast civilization reduced to footnotes. An empire erased so completely that few question its absence. When confronted with these contradictions, conventional historians offer explanations. They suggest Tartaria was merely a geographical term, that architectural similarities result from cultural exchange, that sunken buildings were intentional designs, that world's fairs were simply extravagant showcases. Yet these explanations require us to accept remarkable coincidences, global patterns manifesting identically across continents, architectural marvels appearing without adequate construction methods, a vast empire disappearing from both maps and memory, coincidences that strain credibility. The anomalies extend to the technological realm as well. Many 19th century buildings feature elements suggesting electrical systems before electricity was supposedly widespread. Copper components in curious configurations, metal rods and wires embedded in stone, features without clear explanation. Some researchers propose these were components of atmospheric energy systems, that the ornate domes, spires, and finials adorning these structures weren't merely decorative, but functional technology disguised as architectural elements, a worldwide wireless energy network predating modern electricity. This theory is supported by the curious abundance of copper in these structures, copper domes that have turned green with age, copper wiring and elements embedded within stone walls, metal components placed at specific intervals, in seemingly decorative, suggesting purpose beyond aesthetics. The anomalous nature of star forts presents another puzzle. These elaborate geometric structures appear across continents in identical patterns, their complex designs featuring perfect mathematical symmetry, their construction requiring advanced understanding of geometry, their purpose officially described as defensive. Yet military historians acknowledge these designs offered limited defensive advantage, their elaborate geometry actually creating vulnerability, their true purpose remaining a mystery. Another global architectural pattern that defies conventional explanation, another anomaly in our historical understanding. Historical accounts of atmospheric phenomena add to the mystery. Reports of strange lights, unusual weather, and electromagnetic effects around certain buildings. Descriptions that suggest these structures interacted with the environment in ways beyond mere shelter. Accounts dismissed as superstition by conventional historians. The contradictions in our historical narrative aren't isolated anomalies. They form patterns that suggest our understanding of recent history may be fundamentally flawed. That what we've been taught about the 19th century, a period supposedly well documented, may be largely revision rather than reality. These anomalies converge around the same historical period. The 18th and 19th centuries, when Tartaria was disappearing from maps, when its territories were being absorbed by expanding empires, when its very existence was being written out of history, a convergence too consistent to be coincidental. The contradictions extend to the historical record itself, gaps in documentation during critical periods, missing construction records for major buildings, absent explanations for technological features, a historical amnesia that seems selective rather than random, focused on specific aspects of our past. What emerges is a troubling possibility: that our recent history has been deliberately revised, that the evidence of a previous, advanced civilization has been systematically erased, that what we call history may actually be a constructed narrative designed to hide a more complex reality. This isn't merely academic speculation. The physical evidence surrounds us, in the buildings we inhabit, in the cities we navigate, in the infrastructure we use daily, evidence hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to notice the contradictions, to question the narrative, to see what's been there all along. As we continue our exploration, keep these contradictions in mind. The mysterious appearance of advanced architecture without adequate construction methods, the global patterns manifesting identically across continents, the technological anomalies embedded in supposedly primitive structures, the empire that vanished from history. For in these contradictions lie clues to the truth about Tartaria, a truth that challenges our understanding of human history, a truth that suggests our civilization may not be advancing linearly toward greater knowledge, but recovering what was lost, rediscovering what was deliberately hidden, remembering what was forced into forgetting. Chapter 6. Myths and out-of-place evidence. Throughout human history, myths have often contained kernels of historical truth, stories passed down through generations, preserving memories of events erased from official records. Legends that might actually be distorted accounts of real civilizations, including perhaps the lost empire of Tartaria. Consider the persistent myths of advanced ancient civilizations: Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, stories dismissed as fantasy by mainstream historians. Yet perhaps these weren't myths about the distant past, but memories of a more recent advanced civilization, one whose traces were still visible in the 19th century. The myth of Tartaria itself persists in curious ways. In Russian folklore, Tartary is often associated with a golden age, a time of abundance and advancement. Stories that might preserve cultural memory of an actual civilization. Fragments of history transformed into legend after systematic erasure. Indigenous American myths contain references to ancient builders, people who constructed the elaborate mounds and structures found across the continent, beings of great knowledge who possessed advanced technology, stories dismissed as superstition, yet potentially preserving memories of Tartarian presence in North America. These myths find curious parallels in physical evidence, structures that shouldn't exist according to conventional history, buildings with features too advanced for their supposed era, technologies that appear anachronistic, physical anomalies that challenge our historical timeline. Among the most compelling out-of-place evidence are the buildings themselves. Structures across the world, sharing identical architectural features. Buildings supposedly constructed by different cultures without communication, yet displaying unity of design that suggests a single originating civilization. The neoclassical architecture that suddenly appeared worldwide in the 18th and 19th centuries presents a particular puzzle. Buildings in America, Russia, France, and China featuring identical elements. Structures that would require sophisticated engineering even today, yet supposedly built with primitive methods. Examine the U.S. Capitol building, constructed in the early 19th century. Its massive dome, elaborate stonework, and precise engineering, all supposedly accomplished by a young nation with limited resources and technology. An architectural achievement that strains historical credibility. Or consider the buildings of St. Petersburg. Elaborate structures supposedly built on swampland in the 18th century. Massive stone edifices requiring advanced engineering knowledge, constructed with a precision difficult to achieve even with modern technology. Another historical anomaly hiding in plain sight. These buildings feature curious technological elements, complex ventilation systems that maintain consistent temperatures without modern HVAC, acoustic properties that allow whispers to be heard across vast chambers, engineering features that suggest knowledge beyond their supposed era. The most telling evidence may be the construction methods themselves, or rather, the lack of evidence for these methods. Few detailed construction records exist for many of the world's most impressive 19th century buildings, as if they appeared rather than being built. Another historical anomaly. Historical photographs add to the mystery. Images showing cities under construction with minimal equipment, few workers visible, little evidence of the massive scaffolding and machinery that would be required. Pictures that raise questions about how these structures were actually created. Then there's the curious abundance of freestanding columns, massive stone pillars found in cities worldwide, often called victory columns or monuments, yet sharing identical design features regardless of location. Another global pattern suggesting unified purpose rather than coincidental similarity. Some researchers propose these columns weren't monuments but technology, components of a worldwide energy system, devices for collecting atmospheric electricity, their true function disguised after the fall of Tartaria, their technological purpose rewritten as cultural or commemorative. This theory is supported by the unusual materials often found in these columns. Specific metals embedded in precise locations, copper elements positioned in patterns that suggest electrical function, components arranged in ways that make little sense aesthetically, but great sense technologically. Similar evidence appears in the ornate domes crowning government buildings worldwide, copper-covered spheres topped with spires, structures typically explained as decorative or symbolic, yet potentially serving as receivers in a wireless energy network, their true purpose hidden behind cultural explanations. The mysterious star forts found across continents provide further out-of-place evidence, their elaborate geometric patterns requiring advanced mathematical knowledge, their identical designs appearing simultaneously worldwide, their purpose inadequately explained by conventional military history. These star forts feature precise mathematical proportions, perfect geometric symmetry, construction requiring sophisticated understanding of angles and energy flows, designs that make limited sense for defense but perfect sense as energy generation or distribution points. Another global anomaly. Perhaps the most striking out-of-place evidence comes from World's Fair structures, buildings of such grandeur and complexity that they rival modern architectural achievements, yet supposedly built as temporary structures, created for exhibitions lasting months, then mysteriously destroyed. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair featured buildings so magnificent they were called the White City, massive neoclassical structures constructed in just a few years, buildings that would challenge modern engineering, yet created for a 6-month exhibition, then mostly destroyed by fire. Similar patterns appear at World's Fairs in Paris, St. Louis, and San Francisco, incredible buildings appearing almost overnight, showcased briefly, then eliminated. as if these weren't new constructions at all, but existing Tartarian structures temporarily revealed, then removed from public consciousness. This theory finds support in the limited construction documentation for these buildings, the curious absence of detailed records showing how they were built, the lack of photographs documenting their construction process. Another gap in the historical record that raises troubling questions. The physical anomalies extend to infrastructure, elaborate tunnel systems beneath major cities, networks too extensive to be explained by conventional needs, underground structures suggesting purposes beyond simple transportation or utilities. Another layer of evidence pointing to advanced previous development. In cities like Seattle, Portland, and Chicago, entire street levels were raised. First floors became basements, windows and doorways buried. Official explanations cite flooding or sewage concerns, yet the global pattern of such raising suggests a more significant event, a worldwide phenomenon requiring coordinated response. This pattern aligns with accounts of mysterious mud floods, reports from the 18th and 19th centuries describing cities suddenly inundated with mud, events officially attributed to local flooding, but potentially evidence of a global cataclysm, perhaps the event that ended Tartarian civilization. The timing of these floods coincides precisely with the period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps, when its territories were being absorbed by expanding empires, when its very existence was being written out of history. A convergence that alternative historians find highly significant. Out-of-place technology appears in unexpected locations. Ancient batteries found in archaeological sites, sophisticated metallurgy in supposedly primitive cultures, evidence of electrical knowledge predating modern science, artifacts that challenge our linear view of technological development. Even more telling are the technological anomalies hidden within everyday structures, curious metal components embedded in 19th century buildings, copper and iron elements arranged in patterns suggesting electrical function, materials and designs that make little sense aesthetically but great sense technologically. These elements are typically explained away as decorative or structural, yet their specific arrangements and materials suggest purpose beyond aesthetics, their positioning corresponding to points of electromagnetic significance, their presence implying functionality that official history cannot explain. The myths and physical evidence converge around a troubling possibility, that an advanced global civilization existed in the not-so-distant past, that its technologies may have included wireless energy transmission, that its achievements have been hidden behind a carefully constructed historical narrative. This convergence isn't limited to a few isolated examples. It forms a worldwide pattern, a pattern of architectural similarities across continents, of technological anomalies embedded in familiar structures, of myths preserving memories of an advanced civilization, of physical evidence hiding in plain sight. What emerges is a picture not of separate cultures independently developing similar styles, but of a unified global civilization whose traces remain visible despite systematic erasure, a civilization whose technologies we are only beginning to rediscover, whose achievements we are only starting to recognize. The out-of-place evidence challenges us to question our assumptions about human history, to consider the possibility that our technological development hasn't been linear progress, but perhaps recovery of lost knowledge, rediscovery of principles once widely understood, remembrance of what was forgotten. As we connect these pieces of evidence, as we recognize the patterns they form, as we consider their implications for our understanding of history, we begin to glimpse the outlines of Tartaria, not as myth or speculation, but as a historical reality whose traces surround us still. The question then becomes not whether Tartaria existed, but why its existence has been so thoroughly obscured, why its achievements have been attributed to others, why its very memory has been nearly erased from our collective consciousness. Questions that lead us to even more troubling possibilities. Chapter 7. Stakes Escalation. As we've assembled the evidence for Tartaria's existence, a more profound question emerges. If such a vast, advanced civilization has been systematically erased from history, what does this tell us about our world today? What are the implications for our understanding of human civilization? What are the true stakes of this historical mystery? The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. They challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human progress, about technological development, about the nature of power and knowledge, about who controls the narrative of human history, and ultimately about who we are and what we might become. If Tartaria possessed advanced technology, including possible atmospheric energy systems, then our current energy paradigm, based on fossil fuels and centralized distribution, may represent regression rather than progress. We may be rediscovering technologies that were once widely implemented, then deliberately suppressed. This possibility aligns with the curious suppression of Nikola Tesla's later work. His research into wireless energy transmission, technologies that would have provided abundant free energy, innovations that threatened established power structures and profit models, perhaps rediscoveries rather than new inventions. The architectural evidence suggests building techniques we've lost rather than improved upon. Modern structures, despite advanced technology, rarely match the grandeur, durability, or precision of 19th century buildings. Our progress may actually represent declining capabilities, diminishing rather than advancing skills. Even more troubling is the implication for our understanding of history itself. If Tartaria has been erased so thoroughly, what other aspects of our past have been revised? What other civilizations history? What other technologies have been hidden? What other truths have been obscured? The stakes escalate when we consider who benefits from this historical revision. The powers that emerged after Tartaria's fall, the empires that absorbed its territories, the institutions that control our understanding of history, the interests that shape our conception of technological development, the authorities that define our reality. This isn't merely about correcting the historical record. It's about understanding the nature of power in our world today, about recognizing how control of the past shapes control of the present, about seeing how historical narratives constrain our imagination of what's possible, about perceiving the boundaries of our mental prison. If Tartaria represented a different model of civilization, one potentially based on decentralized energy abundance rather than artificial scarcity, then its erasure may have been more than conquest. It may have been the suppression of an alternative path for human development, the elimination of a competing paradigm. The technologies suggested by Tartarian architecture, atmospheric energy collection, wireless transmission, advanced acoustics, would transform our world if implemented today. They would disrupt trillion-dollar industries, redistribute power from corporations to communities, revolutionize our relationship with energy and resources. This potential disruption provides motive for suppression, economic interests that benefit from the current energy paradigm, power structures that rely on centralized control, institutions that maintain authority through artificial scarcity. All would be threatened by the rediscovery of Tartarian technology. The stakes extend to our ecological future. If atmospheric energy systems once provided abundant clean power, if previous civilizations operated without fossil fuels, then our current environmental crisis may be the result of regression rather than advancement, an unnecessary detour from sustainable technologies that once existed. Perhaps most significant are the implications for human potential. If a previous civilization achieved what Tartaria seems to have accomplished, if humanity once built a global society with advanced technology, then our current limitations may be artificial, our capabilities far greater than we've been led to believe. This realization transforms our understanding of what's possible, of what we might achieve, of who we might become. The discovery of Tartaria isn't merely historical revision, it's the recovery of human potential, the remembrance of capabilities we've forgotten, the recognition of possibilities we've been denied. The mystery deepens when we consider the mechanics of such massive historical revision. How could an entire civilization be erased from collective memory? What would be required to rewrite history on such a scale? What institutions would need to participate? What methods would be employed? Education systems would be essential to such revision, controlling what children learn about the past, establishing authorized narratives while marginalizing alternatives, creating generations who never question the absence of Tartaria, who accept without challenge the conventional historical timeline. Academic institutions would enforce this narrative, determining what constitutes legitimate historical research, establishing methodologies that exclude certain, creating systems of credentialing that marginalize alternative perspectives, maintaining boundaries around acceptable historical inquiry. Media and cultural production would reinforce these limitations, popularizing the authorized version of history, ridiculing alternative perspectives as conspiracy theories, creating social costs for questioning dominant narratives, establishing psychological barriers to open historical investigation. The mechanisms of this control continue today in the marginalization of Tartarian research, in the dismissal of architectural anomalies, in the ridiculing of those who question conventional timelines, in the institutional resistance to evidence that contradicts established historical narratives. Yet despite these mechanisms of control, the evidence persists. In the buildings that surround us, in the maps preserved in libraries, in the technological anomalies hiding in plain sight, in the contradictions and gaps in our historical record, evidence becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The Internet has weakened centralized control of information, allowing researchers to share discoveries outside academic channels, enabling collective investigation of historical anomalies, creating communities dedicated to recovering lost knowledge, facilitating the rediscovery of Tartaria despite institutional resistance. This democratization of historical inquiry represents a significant threat to established power, to institutions that maintain authority through control of the narrative, to interests that benefit from our limited understanding of the past, to systems that rely on our acceptance of artificial constraints. As awareness of Tartaria grows, those with vested interest in the conventional narrative respond. With ridicule and marginalization, with accusations of conspiracy theory, with institutional barriers to serious investigation, with sophisticated information management strategies, with new mechanisms of control. Yet these efforts face an insurmountable challenge. The physical evidence cannot be erased, the buildings still stand, the maps still exist, the technological anomalies remain visible. The contradictions in the historical record become increasingly apparent. The truth about Tartaria continues to emerge. This emergence represents a fundamental challenge to authority, not merely to specific institutions or governments, but to the very nature of authority in our world, to systems of control based on manipulation of history and limitation of human potential, to power structures that require our ignorance to maintain their dominance. The stakes of the Tartarian mystery thus extend to the future of human civilization itself, to our relationship with technology, to our understanding of human capability, to our conception of what's possible, to our imagination of alternatives to current systems, to our potential liberation from artificial constraints. If Tartaria represented a civilization based on principles of abundance rather than scarcity, on decentralized rather than centralized power, on harmony with natural forces rather than their exploitation, then its rediscovery offers more than historical correction. It provides a template for a different future. This potential future, based on rediscovered Tartarian principles, would transform every aspect of human society. Energy systems providing abundant clean power. Architecture that enhances rather than depletes human potential. Technologies that work with natural forces rather than against them. A civilization designed for flourishing rather than control. The resistance to this transformation explains the intensity of efforts to suppress Tartarian research, the systematic marginalization of evidence, the institutional barriers to serious investigation, the sophisticated information management strategies, the mechanisms deployed to maintain the conventional narrative. Yet, as we've seen throughout this documentary, the evidence for Tartaria becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. The architectural anomalies too consistent to ignore, the technological features too precise to be coincidental, the global patterns too uniform to be explained by conventional history, the maps too clear to be misinterpreted. This evidence converges around a disturbing possibility that our entire understanding of recent history has been deliberately engineered. that the narrative of linear human progress is a constructed myth, that we may be recovering from a civilizational collapse rather than advancing toward unprecedented development. If true, this would require us to reconsider everything: our educational systems that perpetuate the conventional narrative, our academic institutions that enforce historical boundaries, our technological development prioritizing profit over human flourishing, our social structures based on artificial scarcity rather than natural abundance. The stakes extend to our very identity as a species, our understanding of who we are and what we might become, our conception of human potential and limitation, our imagination of possible futures, our relationship with our own past, our liberation from artificial constraints on human development. As we proceed into the final chapters of our investigation, the evidence will become even more compelling. The technological signatures in Tartarian architecture more apparent, mechanisms of historical revision more visible, the implications for our understanding of reality more profound, the stakes for human civilization more significant. For we're not merely uncovering a lost empire. We're recovering lost human potential. We're remembering capabilities we've forgotten. We're recognizing possibilities we've been denied. We're glimpsing a different path for human development. A path once traveled, then hidden, now rediscovered. The question is no longer whether Tartaria existed, but what its existence means for our world today, for our understanding of history, for our conception of human capability, for our imagination of possible futures, for our liberation from systems of control based on historical revision and limitation of human potential. As we'll see in the next section, the evidence becomes even more extraordinary when we examine the technological signatures in Tartarian architecture. When we decode the functions disguised as decorative elements, when we recognize the purposes of structures we've been taught to see as merely cultural or governmental, when we understand the true nature of the civilization that has been hidden from us. For the truth about Tartaria isn't merely hidden in dusty archives or obscure maps. It surrounds us in the buildings we inhabit, in the cities we navigate, in the infrastructure we use daily. Evidence hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to see with new eyes, to recognize what has been there all along, to remember what we've been forced to forget. Chapter 8. Competing Theories. As we approach the climax of our investigation, we must consider the competing theories that attempt to explain the Tartarian mystery. Not all researchers agree on what Tartaria was or why it disappeared. Several compelling explanations have emerged, each supported by evidence, each with profound implications for our understanding of history. The first major theory proposes that Tartaria was indeed a vast advanced empire, one that possessed sophisticated technology, including atmospheric energy systems, a civilization that spanned continents and implemented a unified architectural and technological language, a global power deliberately erased from history after its fall. Proponents of this theory point to the consistent architectural evidence, the identical features of buildings across continents, the technological components disguised as decorative elements, the sudden appearance of elaborate structures worldwide during the same historical period. The maps clearly showing Tartaria as a unified empire. They suggest Tartaria fell during a global cataclysm in the late 18th or early 19th century. A disaster potentially involving electromagnetic disruption and subsequent mud floods, an event that buried cities worldwide and destroyed Tartarian power systems, creating the conditions for imperial powers to absorb its territories. Following this catastrophe, they argue, the victorious powers, primarily Russia, Britain, and later America, divided Tartarian territories, implemented a systematic campaign to erase Tartaria from history, repurposed its buildings while hiding their technological functions, created a new historical narrative that persists to this day. The evidence for this theory includes the elaborate star forts found worldwide, the copper-domed buildings with suspicious electrical components, the freestanding columns with specific metallic elements, the sophisticated ventilation and acoustic systems in supposedly primitive structures, the global architectural unity suggesting centralized design. This theory also explains the curious abundance of orphans in the 19th century, The mysterious mud floods, the raised street levels in cities worldwide, the sudden appearance of elaborate architecture without adequate construction methods, the global patterns that conventional history struggles to explain. The second major theory takes a more moderate approach. It suggests Tartaria was indeed a significant civilization, but not necessarily possessing advanced technology beyond its time. Rather, it was a sophisticated culture whose achievements have been deliberately minimized in Western historical accounts. Proponents of this theory point to cultural and political motivations. Western powers minimizing non-European achievements. Russian expansion requiring justification through historical revision. Colonial narratives necessitating the erasure of previous civilizations. Academic traditions centered on European accomplishments. They argue that Tartaria was advanced for its time, but within the technological parameters of the era, its architectural achievements resulting from sophisticated traditional methods rather than lost technology, its influence widespread but not global, its erasure more cultural and political than conspiratorial. This theory explains the architectural similarities through cultural diffusion, the spread of styles and techniques through trade and exchange, the adoption of effective designs across cultures, the natural evolution of successful architectural solutions, patterns emerging through imitation rather than centralized control. It accounts for Tartaria's disappearance from historical records through the lens of winners' history. European powers minimizing the achievements of conquered peoples, academic traditions focusing on Western developments, cultural biases in historical documentation, systemic preferences for certain historical narratives. The evidence for this theory includes historical accounts of Tartarian Russian conflicts, the gradual absorption of Tartarian territories by expanding empires, the cultural suppression that typically follows conquest, the academic traditions that prioritize certain civilizations over others, the documented biases in Western historical accounts. A third theory takes a more skeptical approach, suggesting that what we call Tartaria was never a unified empire at all, but rather a geographical region containing various cultures and political entities, its appearance on maps as a single entity, resulting from European misunderstanding of Asian political structures. Proponents of this theory point to the diversity within Tartarian territories, the various ethnic groups, languages and cultures, the different political systems operating across the region, the lack of evidence for centralized Tartarian governance, the inconsistent descriptions in historical accounts. They argue that the architectural similarities worldwide result from the natural evolution of neoclassical style, the adoption of effective building techniques across cultures, the influence of pattern books and architectural treatises, the spread of styles through academic training and professional networks, the convergent evolution of architectural solutions. This theory explains the technological anomalies as misinterpretations of conventional features, decorative elements mistaken for functional components, structural necessities confused with advanced technology, cultural symbolism misread as technological purpose, modern perspectives creating false patterns in historical data. It accounts for the supposed erasure of Tartaria as simply the natural evolution of geographical terminology, maps becoming more precise as exploration advanced, regional terms replaced by more specific designations, general classifications giving way to detailed political boundaries, not conspiracy but cartographic progress. The evidence for this theory includes the diverse cultures historically present in Tartarian territories, the lack of archaeological evidence for unified governance, the natural evolution of cartographic practices, the documented spread of architectural styles through conventional means, the professional networks that shared building techniques. Each of these theories offers a framework for understanding the Tartarian evidence. Each attempts to explain the architectural anomalies, historical gaps, and global patterns. Each has strengths and weaknesses. Each leads to different conclusions about our history and its implications for our present. The first theory requires us to accept a radical revision of recent history, to believe in advanced technology, lost and hidden, to accept a global conspiracy of historical manipulation, yet it elegantly explains the architectural and technological anomalies that other theories struggle to address. The second theory offers a middle path. acknowledging Tartaria's significance while remaining within conventional historical parameters. Recognizing cultural bias in historical accounts without proposing lost advanced technology. Explaining architectural similarities through cultural exchange rather than centralized design. The third theory requires the least revision to conventional history. It explains the evidence through established historical mechanisms. It doesn't require lost technology or global conspiracy, yet it struggles to account for the precise similarities in architecture across continents, the technological anomalies in historical structures. As we weigh these competing theories, we must consider not just the evidence, but also our methodology, our biases, our willingness to question established narratives, our capacity to recognize patterns without imposing them, our ability to distinguish between correlation and causation. We must also consider the implications of each theory, what it means for our understanding of history, for our conception of human capability, for our relationship with technology, for our trust in institutional knowledge, for our imagination of alternative futures. The true answer likely incorporates elements from multiple theories. Tartaria was probably more significant than conventional history acknowledges, its achievements more impressive, its influence more widespread, its erasure more deliberate, yet perhaps not possessing technology as advanced as some researchers suggest. As we proceed to examine new scientific discoveries and the paradoxes they reveal, keep these competing theories in mind. Consider how each explains the evidence, how each resolves or creates contradictions, how each aligns with or challenges conventional history, how each shapes our understanding of the lost empire of Tartaria. For the truth about Tartaria, whatever it may be, has profound implications, not just for our understanding of the past, but for our navigation of the present and our creation of the future. A truth we continue to uncover as we examine the evidence with open minds and critical thinking. Chapter 9. New Science and Paradoxes. Recent scientific advancements have begun to shed new light on the Tartarian mystery. Archaeological techniques, materials analysis, and electromagnetic studies have revealed surprising data, evidence that challenges conventional explanations, and creates paradoxes that demand resolution, new science that points toward extraordinary conclusions. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of major cities have revealed extensive underground structures, networks of tunnels and chambers beneath places like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Paris. Subterranean systems too extensive to be explained by conventional infrastructure needs. Underground architecture suggesting purposes beyond modern understanding. Similar surveys in American cities have uncovered equally puzzling findings. Elaborate foundations beneath 19th century buildings, substructures suggesting previous development, underground connections between supposedly unrelated buildings, evidence of sophisticated planning that preceded official city development. Materials analysis of 19th century buildings has yielded fascinating results. The composition of mortar and concrete unlike modern formulations, molecular structures suggesting advanced understanding of material science, durability exceeding contemporary capabilities, physical properties that challenge conventional historical timelines. Particularly significant are the metallurgical analyses of components in historic buildings, copper and iron elements with unusual purity, alloys with specific electrical properties, metallic compositions that suggest deliberate engineering for conductivity, materials science seemingly beyond 19th century capabilities. Electromagnetic studies of historic structures have produced some of the most compelling evidence. Many older buildings exhibit unusual electromagnetic properties, domes and spires that interact with Earth's electromagnetic field, structures that demonstrate resonant frequencies, buildings that behave like sophisticated electronic components. Scientists measuring the electromagnetic properties of copper-domed buildings have detected consistent patterns, resonant frequencies that match those found in wireless energy systems, harmonic oscillations suggesting deliberate tuning, field effects that appear non-random, characteristics indicating technological purpose rather than coincidence. Starforts, when analyzed electromagnetically, reveal equally surprising properties. Their geometric layouts create specific field effects. Their dimensions correspond to wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. Their orientation aligns with geomagnetic patterns. Their design suggesting purposes far beyond military defense. These scientific findings create significant paradoxes for conventional history. If these structures were merely decorative or symbolic, why do they exhibit such specific electromagnetic properties? Why do they contain materials engineered for conductivity? Why do they create measurable field effects? Why do they resonate at specific frequencies? The paradox extends to the geographic distribution of these buildings. Their placement creates patterns visible only when mapped electromagnetically, relationships between structures across continents, geometric arrangements suggesting a unified system, global patterns impossible to explain through coincidence or independent development. Modern energy researchers examining these patterns have proposed a startling hypothesis: that these buildings may have formed a worldwide wireless energy network, that their copper domes and spires collected atmospheric electricity, that their geometric arrangements facilitated distribution, that they provided power without fossil fuels. This hypothesis aligns with Nikola Tesla's later work, his experiments with wireless energy transmission, his Wardenclyffe Tower designed to provide free electricity, his understanding of Earth's electromagnetic properties, his technologies that threatened established power structures, perhaps rediscoveries rather than new inventions. The scientific paradoxes extend to the mud flood phenomenon. Geological studies of soil layers in major cities show anomalous deposits, sediment that appears to have accumulated rapidly rather than gradually, composition suggesting catastrophic origin rather than normal geological processes, evidence supporting accounts of sudden inundation. Analysis of this sediment has revealed unusual properties, mineral compositions inconsistent with local geology, electromagnetic characteristics suggesting exposure to unusual energy fields, patterns of deposition indicating sudden rather than gradual accumulation. Scientific evidence supporting historical accounts previously dismissed as myth. Perhaps most puzzling are the astronomical alignments of Tartarian structures, buildings positioned to mark specific celestial events, arrangements corresponding to astronomical phenomena, orientations aligning with cosmic patterns, geometric relationships suggesting sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. These alignments create another paradox for conventional history. How did builders across continents create structures with identical astronomical relationships? How did they achieve such precise positioning without modern surveying equipment? How did they coordinate such a global system without advanced communication? How did they implement such consistent design without centralized planning? The technological paradoxes become even more apparent when examining the acoustic properties of historic domes. Their perfect sound transmission, their ability to amplify specific frequencies while dampening others, their acoustic focusing that enables whispers to be heard across vast chambers. Engineering feats difficult to achieve even with modern acoustic science. Scientific measurements of these acoustic properties reveal sophisticated engineering, precise mathematical relationships between dimensions, specific ratios that create optimal resonance, materials selected for their acoustic properties, design principles indicating advanced understanding of sound propagation, engineering beyond conventional 19th century capabilities. The ventilation systems in historic buildings present another scientific paradox: their ability to maintain consistent temperatures without mechanical assistance, their sophisticated airflow management, their integration with overall building design, their effectiveness exceeding many modern systems, their engineering suggesting knowledge we're only now rediscovering. Thermal imaging studies of these buildings reveal surprising efficiency, heat distribution patterns indicating deliberate design, temperature regulation systems working without modern technology, airflow management through precisely calculated channels, performance characteristics that challenge conventional historical timelines. These scientific findings converge around a troubling conclusion: that the buildings we attribute to the 18th and 19th centuries exhibit technology beyond their supposed era, that their properties suggest knowledge we're only beginning to rediscover. That their performance indicates capabilities we've lost rather than improved upon. This creates the fundamental paradox of the Tartarian mystery. Either we must accept that conventional history is incorrect about when and how these buildings were created, or we must believe that 18th and 19th century builders possessed knowledge and capabilities far beyond what conventional history acknowledges. Neither option aligns with the established historical narrative. Either these structures weren't built when and how we've been told, or human technological development hasn't followed the linear progression we've been taught. Either possibility requires significant revision of our understanding of recent history. The paradoxes extend to the physical impossibility of constructing such buildings with 19th century technology, the logistics of moving massive stone blocks without modern equipment, the precision cutting and fitting of materials without power tools, the engineering calculations without computers, the construction timelines documented in historical records. Modern architects and engineers studying these structures often acknowledge they would struggle to replicate them today. The precision of stonework exceeding modern tolerances, the durability surpassing contemporary materials, the acoustic and thermal properties challenging current capabilities, the integrated systems functioning without mechanical assistance. These acknowledgements create yet another paradox. If we can't easily replicate these buildings with modern technology, how were they created with horse-drawn carts and manual labor? If contemporary engineers marvel at their construction, how did supposedly less advanced builders accomplish such feats? If modern material science can't match their durability, how were they achieved with 19th century knowledge? The scientific evidence thus points toward a conclusion many find difficult to accept, that these structures may not have been built when or how conventional history claims, that they may represent the achievements of a civilization more advanced than we've acknowledged, that they may be the remnants of Tartaria hiding in plain sight. This conclusion aligns with the cartographic evidence. The historical maps clearly showing Tartaria as a vast empire, the gradual erasure of its territories from later maps, the absorption of its lands by expanding powers, the cartographic record of a civilization being systematically removed from history. It also aligns with the documented accounts of Tartarian culture and technology, the references in 18th century literature to its achievements, the descriptions by travelers of its advanced capabilities, the diplomatic correspondence acknowledging its power, the historical record of a civilization later recognized and forgotten. The paradoxes we've examined cannot be easily dismissed. They represent measurable, verifiable scientific data, evidence that challenges conventional explanations, findings that demand reconsideration of our historical narrative, proof that something significant has been missing from our understanding of the past. As we approach our final revelations, consider the convergence of this scientific evidence, the electromagnetic properties of historic buildings, the material composition of their components, the mathematical precision of their design, the technological functions disguised as decorative elements, the global patterns suggesting unified purpose. For in this convergence lies the truth about Tartaria, a truth supported not by speculation, but by scientific measurement, not by conspiracy theory, but by empirical evidence, not by wishful thinking, but by rigorous analysis. A truth that challenges us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about our recent past. Chapter 10. The Big Reveal. We've journeyed through maps and documents, examined architectural anomalies, considered competing theories, explored scientific paradoxes. Now we arrive at the culmination of our investigation. The revelation that ties together all the evidence we've examined, the truth about Tartaria that has been hiding in plain sight. The evidence converges around a conclusion both simple and profound. Tartaria was real, not merely as a geographical region or loose collection of tribes, but as an advanced civilization spanning continents. A global empire with sophisticated technology, a culture whose achievements have been systematically erased from our historical record. This was not a primitive society, but one whose technological understanding in certain areas may have exceeded our own, particularly in the harmonious utilization of Earth's natural electromagnetic properties. In the implementation of wireless energy systems, In the integration of technology with architecture, in sustainable design principles we're only beginning to rediscover. The buildings we've examined weren't merely cultural or governmental structures, they were functional technology. Their copper domes and spires collecting atmospheric electricity, their geometric layouts facilitating distribution, their materials selected for specific electrical properties, their design implementing a sophisticated understanding of electromagnetic principles. This technological system operated on principles similar to those later rediscovered by Nikola Tesla, utilizing the resonant properties of Earth's electromagnetic field, harvesting atmospheric electricity, transmitting power wirelessly, providing energy without fossil fuels or centralized control, a system elegant in its design and revolutionary in its implications. The star forts weren't primarily defensive structures, but nodes in this energy network. Their geometric patterns creating specific electromagnetic effects, their placement corresponding to geological and atmospheric conditions, their design implementing precise mathematical relationships, their purpose technological rather than military. The ornate cultural buildings with their copper domes served as collection points, the freestanding columns as transmission devices, the elaborate tunnel systems as distribution networks, the whole forming an integrated technology disguised within architectural beauty, function hidden behind form, purpose concealed within aesthetic. This worldwide energy system supported a civilization more advanced than conventional history acknowledges, a global culture implementing consistent architectural and technological principles across continents, a society whose achievements have been attributed to later civilizations, an empire whose very existence has been systematically obscured. The maps confirm this was no small kingdom. Tartaria spanned from Eastern Europe across Asia, its influence extending potentially to North America, its territories encompassing much of the known world, its prominence on historical maps reflecting its significance, its gradual erasure from cartography, documenting its systematic removal from history. The catastrophic end of this civilization appears to have occurred in the late 18th or early 19th century, a cataclysm involving electromagnetic disruption and subsequent mud floods, an event that buried cities worldwide, destroyed the Tartarian energy system, and created the conditions for imperial powers to absorb its territories. Following this catastrophe, the victorious powers, primarily Russia, Britain, and emerging America, divided Tartarian territories, implemented a systematic campaign to erase Tartaria from history, repurposed its buildings while hiding their technological functions, created a new historical narrative that persists to this day. This explains the curious abundance of orphans in the 19th century, the mysterious mud floods, the raised street levels in cities worldwide, the sudden appearance of elaborate architecture without adequate construction methods, the global patterns that conventional history struggles to explain. It accounts for the technological features in historic buildings that science now confirms. The electromagnetic properties of copper domes, the resonant frequencies of architectural elements, the material composition suggesting electrical function, the geometric relationships indicating unified design, the physical evidence hiding in plain sight. The revelation of Tartaria's existence and technological achievement transforms our understanding of history. It suggests human civilization hasn't followed a linear path of progress, but has experienced cycles of advancement and collapse. That technologies we consider modern innovations may actually be rediscoveries of lost knowledge. This pattern of rediscovery is exemplified by Nikola Tesla's work, his experiments with wireless energy transmission mirroring Tartarian technology, his Wardenclyffe Tower implementing principles visible in earlier structures, his research threatening established power structures, his innovations suppressed by the very interests that benefited from Tartaria's fall. The implications extend to our energy paradigm today. The dependence on fossil fuels and centralized distribution may not represent progress, but regression from more advanced systems, technologies that worked harmoniously with natural forces, systems that provided abundant energy without environmental destruction, capabilities we've forgotten rather than surpassed. This revelation challenges the fundamental narrative of modernity, the belief that our civilization represents the pinnacle of human achievement. that our technological development has been continuous improvement, that earlier societies were necessarily more primitive, that progress is linear rather than cyclical. It suggests instead that we may be recovering from a civilizational collapse, rediscovering knowledge that was once widely implemented, rebuilding capabilities that were lost, remembering principles that were forgotten, reclaiming our technological heritage rather than creating it anew. The systematic erasure of Tartaria from history wasn't merely cultural revision, but the suppression of an alternative model of civilization, one based on principles of abundance rather than scarcity, on harmonious use of natural forces rather than their exploitation, on distributed rather than centralized power, a competing paradigm eliminated by the forces that shaped our modern world. This explains the intensity of efforts to suppress Tartarian research, the systematic marginalization of evidence, the institutional barriers to serious investigation, the sophisticated information management strategies, the mechanisms deployed to maintain the conventional narrative, the resistance proportional to the significance of what's being hidden. Yet despite these efforts, the truth has persisted, in the buildings that surround us, in the maps preserved in libraries, in the technological anomalies hiding in plain sight, in the contradictions and gaps in our historical record, evidence becoming increasingly difficult to ignore as science confirms what researchers have long suspected. The revelation of Tartaria isn't merely historical correction. It's the recovery of human potential, the remembrance of capabilities we've forgotten, the recognition of possibilities we've been denied, the glimpse of a different path for human development, a path once traveled, then hidden, now rediscovered. This rediscovery has profound implications for our future. If a previous civilization implemented worldwide wireless energy, if previous generations built in harmony with natural forces, if earlier societies achieved what we're only beginning to imagine, then our potential far exceeds the limitations we've accepted. The evidence we've examined throughout this documentary leads to this inevitable conclusion. Tartaria was real, its achievements were extraordinary, its erasure was deliberate, its rediscovery is transformative. Its legacy surrounds us still in the buildings we've inherited, in the technology we're beginning to understand, in the potential we're starting to reclaim. As this truth emerges more widely, we face a choice: to cling to the conventional narrative despite mounting evidence to the contrary, or to embrace a more complex understanding of our history, to recognize the cycles of advancement and collapse, to acknowledge the deliberate suppression of knowledge, to reclaim the technological heritage that is rightfully ours. This choice has implications beyond historical accuracy. It affects how we envision our future, how we relate to technology, how we organize our societies, how we generate and distribute energy, how we understand human potential, how we imagine possibilities beyond current limitations. The revelation of Tartaria offers not just truth about our past, but liberation from artificial constraints on our future. Not just historical correction, but expanded imagination of what's possible. Not just academic revision, but practical reclamation of lost knowledge, not just theory, but transformation. For in recovering the truth about Tartaria, we recover something even more valuable: the knowledge that human civilization has achieved greatness before, that our capabilities exceed our current implementation, that alternatives to our present systems have existed, that what has been forgotten can be remembered, that what has been lost can be found again. The lost empire of Tartaria wasn't merely erased from our maps, but from our consciousness, not just from our history books, but from our sense of possibility, not only from our past, but from our imagination of the future. A double erasure now being undone as the evidence becomes impossible to ignore. As we conclude our investigation, the question isn't whether Tartaria existed, but what its existence means for our world today. Not whether its technology was advanced, but how we might reclaim that advancement. Not whether history has been revised, but how we might correct that revision. Not whether knowledge has been suppressed, but how we might liberate that knowledge for the benefit of all. Coda, final payoff and open loop. Evidence meter, 1010, decoded. We began this journey questioning whether a vast, advanced civilization could have been systematically erased from history. We end with the recognition that the evidence for Tartaria's existence and technological achievement is overwhelming. Not speculative but scientific. Not imagined but documented. Not conspiracy theory but verifiable fact. The truth about Tartaria transforms our understanding of human history. It reveals cycles where we thought there was linear progression. It shows collapse where we imagined continuous advancement. It exposes deliberate suppression where we assumed natural development. It demonstrates technological regression where we believed in constant improvement. This revelation doesn't end our inquiry but deepens it. If Tartaria achieved what the evidence suggests, what other aspects of our history might be equally misrepresented? What other technologies might we be rediscovering rather than inventing? What other capabilities might lie dormant in our collective memory? What other truths await rediscovery? As you move through the world now, observe the buildings around you with new awareness. Notice the copper domes and ornate spires that may have once collected atmospheric electricity. Recognize the star forts whose geometric patterns served technological functions. See the freestanding columns that may have transmitted energy. Perceive the evidence hiding in plain sight. The story of Tartaria reminds us that history is not fixed but fluid, not objective but constructed, not inevitable but chosen, not merely past but present in the structures we inhabit and the systems we perpetuate. A living legacy that continues to shape our reality even as we rediscover its existence. Perhaps most importantly, the revelation of Tartaria expands our imagination of what's possible. If human civilization once implemented worldwide wireless energy, if our ancestors built in harmony with natural forces, if previous generations achieved what we're only beginning to reimagine, then our potential far exceeds the limitations we've accepted. In this expanded possibility lies the true significance of Tartaria's rediscovery. Not merely historical correction, but future liberation. Not just academic revision, but practical reclamation. Not only truth about our past, but freedom to create a different future. A future informed by the knowledge that what has been achieved once can be achieved again. As we close this exploration, I invite you to continue your own investigation, to observe with new eyes the evidence around you, to question the narratives you've been taught, to imagine possibilities beyond conventional limitations, and to join us for future journeys into hidden history, forgotten technology, and the truth that lies beyond the veil of official narratives.